thanks for joining Mesa Public Library for an author talk with Ralph and Deborah Blumenthal. Ralph Blumenthal was a longtime award-winning staff reporter who worked for the New York Times from 1964 up until 2009. And in 2017, he co-authored the Times article that broke the news of the secret Pentagon unit investigating UFOs. And actually later in the program, I will share a video that was released by the U.S. Department of Defense to the New York Times of a U.S. Navy jet encounter with a UFO. In 2021, UNM Press released his latest book, The Believer, Alien Encounters, Hard Science, and the Passion of John Mack. And he's written several other nonfiction books on a range of topics, including Miracle at Sing Sing, How One Man Transformed the Lives of America's Most Dangerous Prisoners. And he is a distinguished lecturer at Baruch College. His wife, Deborah Blumenthal, has authored 27 books and is an award-winning journalist as well. She's also a nutritionist who now divides her time between writing children's books and novels. She has been a regular contributor to the New York Times, including 4 years as the Sunday New York Times Magazine beauty columnist, and has a home design column for Long Island Newsday. Before we get started, for those who have found us online, this program was recorded in New Mexico, a state with a rich history of UFO activity, including, of course, everyone's favorite sighting, which occurred in Roswell. Some of you may already know this, but for those who don't, come July, Roswell's 76th annual UFO festival will be taking place. So for any of you UFO lovers who enjoy quirky festivals, I highly recommend a trip down there for the weekend to see what it's all about. And you can pay a visit to the International UFO Museum and Research Center. And of course, there's no shortage of photo ops. I had my own alien encounter on the trip, and though the aliens were in fact as small as everyone says, they weren't nearly as high tech. All right, let's shift direction. I'd like to hand it over to Ralph and Deborah Blumenthal. Your new children's book that both of you worked on together. It's called UFOs Mysteries in the Sky.
Sure, Jessica. I mean, first of all, there are no aliens in this book. This is a children's book that is strictly factual. We're very proud of that. It's a way of introducing young readers to the topic, which is universal. They're going to see it on TV. They're going to see books about it. It's all over. We don't really talk about aliens in this book. We talk about the sightings of UFOs, which are very, very common. Now, as you said, they've been captured by captures, maybe not the right word, by Navy cameras, pictures of UFOs. So for the first time, we can say that the phenomenon has been verified and accepted by the U.S. government. For a long time, it wasn't. So that's the background, that we're dealing now in an age when the government admits that there are physical objects up there and sometimes underwater that no one understands. And we were hoping to give children a basis for at least asking the right questions about this and giving parents the kind of basis for discussing it with their kids, because they're going to be seeing a lot of this as they grow up.
Thanks, Ralph. Deborah, you worked on this book as well. Would you like to share anything about your experience of writing this?
Well, my first, actually, I spent a few years, especially during the pandemic, being home with Ralph and listening to him do interviews for his book, The Believer. And it struck me one day that I had never looked into the fact that there wasn't a children's book on UFOs. And it really surprised me, because I thought, gee, people all over the world have reported sightings and obviously are talking about these sightings at home with their family and friends. And children are sitting around not understanding exactly what they're hearing. So I thought there really was a gap in what was out there. I mean, there are books directed to older children, but there's nothing in terms of picture books. So that really, the bulb was lit up at that point, and we decided to work on something together. So that really is how it all started.
Yeah, I mean, there are some books that are longer for older readers, middle grade.
Yeah.
But we wanted a book that would introduce young children to this concept in a way that wouldn't poison their minds one way or the other. I mean, with no real agenda, just the facts, and beautifully illustrated, I should say, by a very talented artist we've worked with, Deborah's worked with before, Adam Gustafson. So we try to present the phenomenon as a question more than an answer, but a question that people all around the world, not only in America, by the way, but everywhere, have been seeing these things without any answer. But now, again, according to our own government, they are real. They are real.
And in fact, in the book, we don't pretend to have the answers. What we really want to do is provoke thinking and provoke discussion. And I think that'll happen if, parents are talking to their children about what they see and what we don't know and what we do want to know, and asking children, well, what do you imagine? What do you think of this? And children are much smarter than we give them credit for very often. And so, I hope it is a book that encourages discussion, and a book that children and teachers use as a resource, because it certainly falls into the realm of science, not fiction.
That's exciting to hear. Actually, Ralph, you were kind enough to do an author talk for your other book, The Believer, that was published by UNM Press in 2021 for the library. That was last July, so we're going on a year ago. Again, our library is in Los Alamos, New Mexico, home of Los Alamos National Laboratories. Huge scientific community up there, and your program actually on this topic was one of the most popular that we've ever had, and it was kind of, we were wondering which way it was going to go. Are scientists really going to be interested in this? And it turns out many members of our community were. So
well, that's great to see that. That's great to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So when parents get the book for their kids, what can they expect to see in there? I know you said there's going to be lots of facts, but what format is it presented in?
Oh, I'm actually going to hold up. I have the book in front of me. I'll just hold up a few spreads. So you just get a sense of it. It really is a book that is predominantly pictures and asks important questions. And I think it's a book that's fun to look at.
Yeah, that's a picture of a woman on the telephone calling the police to report a strange object outside her window.
Right. I think the artist had a lot, Adam had a lot of fun with that picture with the hair rollers. So, again, it's not a book to scare children. It's just a book to lay out what we know and what we don't know in a very open and the simplest way.
What I could also say is that this is a subject that has been surrounded with a lot of stigma over the years, thanks to the government, which made it a disreputable subject from the very beginning for all kinds of reasons. The government didn't want to own up to the fact that this was a puzzling phenomenon in the highest levels of the American government and the military. So they tried to discredit people for many years who saw UFOs, reported them. So we are trying to get rid of that stigma and say that it's okay to, say that you've seen something you don't understand. And now the government itself is saying this to its own, military personnel. If you're a Navy officer on a ship and you see something like this, it's okay to report it. Not only okay, it's good to report it. It's important to report it. The stigma has been a big problem all along, and politicians won't talk about it. People in Congress won't talk about it. They're beginning to. But for a long time, anyone who raised this subject was, viewed as maybe slightly crazy, kooky. Yeah. So that's the first thing. We got to get rid of that stigma and tell parents it's okay to discuss it with your kids. It's a funny subject, so maybe you can get a laugh out of it. That's okay. But
there also is the element of people accepting this and not accepting it. Many people that we meet are fascinated by the whole phenomenon of UFOs, and there are other people who walk away when you start talking about it. But you know, that's okay. What we hope is perhaps to bring these two groups together somewhat, and to accept that yes, this is real. You know, we don't understand it. We have no idea where these things come from. But it's real. There've been sightings all over the world. It's not a question, do you believe or not believe? You know, it's a true phenomenon. So that's what we hope to, break through that sense of disbelief about UFOs.
Right. Deborah raised a very good point. She said, we're often asked, do you believe in UFOs?
Right.
And that's absolutely the wrong question, as we've often pointed out. It's like saying, do you believe in the moon? Do you believe in the ocean? It's there. The question is, what is it? Well, we don't know, but it's not a question of believing that there are objects up there that we don't understand. You can believe or not believe, but they're up there and they're sometimes underwater. So that's the issue. So, people often raise that as, do you believe in UFOs? It's not a question of belief.
What do you think caused this topic to be so stigmatized historically, and what is now turning the tide in terms of how the government is responding to these sightings?
I studied this a lot from my book, The Believer. I traced this history, and early on, starting really with Roswell or even before, when objects were sighted and reported, the government took the position that we cannot let this news out. Or at least we cannot let the news out unfiltered. So we have to create this aura of disbelief, this aura of strangeness, of mental illness surrounding it, because the government, for complicated reasons, did not want to admit that this was something it did not understand, didn't know, was truly troubling, and it was troubling some of the highest people in the government. It was seriously concerning them, but they didn't want to share that concern with the public. They thought the public can't handle it. So they would ridicule it. They would do everything they could to undermine it. And this was a program carried through by the CIA and the Pentagon and all branches of government. So that's the problem. Now we have to counter that, and it's countered because the government now realizes that that's not gonna fly anymore. It's not gonna work. People know too much, and there's been too much written. So now the government said,
the shared knowledge now that we didn't have before,
certainly with social media now, people taking pictures of these things on their cell phones. The cat is literally out of the bag.
And there's also the business of protecting people, from information. It really reflects on the book banning that's going on now. My feeling is, you want to protect people, give them information, let them deal with it, expose them to whatever we know, then they're very capable of handling things. And the same holds true for children.
There's a really interesting video that I referenced in the introduction that was released by the U.S. State Department to the New York Times. And I'd like to share that. Let me go ahead and pull it up here really quick. Give me just a second.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like another thing, it's rotating. Nickel 6-1 Tango Project. Oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger. There's troubleshooting machines like did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow. Look at it fly.
I never get tired of seeing that. It always amazes me. There are two different videos that the Navy released to the New York Times when we wrote our big story in 2017. On both coasts, off the East Coast and off Virginia and the West Coast off San Diego, Navy ships and planes were encountering these strange objects in 2005 and later up to 2015. And these videos were taken from those encounters. And as you can hear, the pilots and the people on the Navy ships viewing the videos were very excited. They knew they were seeing something that they could not explain, and something that was very real. It was not a hallucination. It wasn't a fly speck on the windshield. You know, all the things that so-called skeptics have been saying for so long to explain this. These are real objects that we don't understand how they got here, who's running them, how they maintain their amazing aerodynamics. They turn on a dime. They sometimes go on into the water. They suddenly stop and go in another direction. They follow Navy jets. I mean, all these things. And you hear that in the voices of the Navy people who are watching this video when it was shown to them originally. They're absolutely astounded, and that's the kind of feeling we try to capture in this book, the mystery of it. It's exciting. There's something real there that we don't understand, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to it. Exactly.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for your insight on that video. I know that was, for those who don't remember, I mean, that was a real bombshell 7 years ago or so, or I'm sorry, 6 years ago or so when you put that article out. Wasn't that the first time the public got to see the government openly acknowledge the existence of UFOs?
It was actually the story we broke in 2017 in the New York Times was that the Pentagon had a secret unit to investigate UFOs, and for 50 years it was not known that the government was investigating UFOs. I mean, the government had done that a long time ago, but in 1969 it closed a famous report, Project Blue Book report, by saying these things don't really exist, and there were 700 cases unexplained, but they still said there's nothing more to investigate. We're closing the book on Project Blue Book. Well, P.S. 50 years later, suddenly we find out that the Pentagon does have a unit that is investigating UFOs. It's taken these pictures of encounters between Navy pilots and some of these objects. So that was the big news, and the Navy wasn't denying it anymore.
Yeah, it's exciting times to be alive for sure. I mean, I remember there used to be so much shame around that, but even to sort of ponder on it, it's like you'd get shamed for even wondering. So it's great that you're kind of doing some work to make it more openly accepted, to at least talk about it and think about it. Deborah, I know you were showing us the book a few minutes ago. Would you mind reading a little bit from it just to give us a sense of like what kinds of questions you're asking in the book?
Okay, sure. It starts actually with, this is a true story. One night in Florida, when he was playing tennis, something made Wes look up at the sky. He held his breath. A thing as big as a car was floating in the air above the lights of the tennis court. I'll just show you the picture there. It was oval shaped with flashing lights, red and blue. Wes stared. So did his friend Ken. So did two grown-ups on the next court. The thing flew closer to them and then suddenly shot out of sight and disappeared. What was that? Wes asked the grown-ups. They shook their heads. Wes and his friend ran back to Wes's house, shouting, "We just saw a UFO."
And I want to say that this is a true story because I used it in my book, The Believer. Wes is a real person, as we explain in the afterword. He told me this story. He's now a psychiatrist. And he remembered all the way back when he was a little kid, and he saw this on the tennis court with a friend of his named Ken. So that is a real story, and it's similar to so many other sightings that we have heard about over the years. Literally millions of people have had similar sightings, some clear, some not so clear. But anyway, that's the story of that opening.
And there's another incident, which I'll just reference, in Zimbabwe, in Southern Africa. Children were also outside playing in the schoolyard when they saw a UFO. And we draw pictures of them, the grown-ups said, so they did. And the pictures looked the same. All these children who had never seen anything like that drew the same picture. So as journalists, when people who don't know each other tell you the same thing, you begin to think there's something there. So we included that in the book as well.
And children, by the way, make very good witnesses, because they have not been contaminated by books they've read, or a lot of them haven't seen movies about UFOs. So when John Mack, who was the Harvard psychiatrist I write about in The Believer, heard about this incident in Zimbabwe, he flew there in a plane, not a UFO, and talked to the kids. And he was very good with kids himself. He was kind of a specialist in child psychology, so he knew what kids were capable of, and he found children's accounts particularly believable, because for the reasons I just said, they haven't been contaminated by other sources of information. They just talked about what they saw, and 60 different kids basically told the same story, not because they got together and agreed on a story to tell, but because they all saw the same thing. And then they drew pictures, as Deborah said, and some of the pictures are reproduced in the book. But that is a very, very compelling case.
Yeah, absolutely. I read The Believer, and that one really stands out to me because of the number of people involved. How many was it? Can you?
It was 60 kids. They were all out at recess, and this happened in 1996, I believe. So they all saw it, and these were grade school children, probably ranging from 8, 9, 10, 11. Boys, girls, children of mixed backgrounds, and they all told the same story, and they told it to John Mack, the psychiatrist, and there's now a documentary about it.
And they were very articulate.
Yeah, very articulate, and they stuck to their story. Even when the grown-ups try to say, well, what would you say if I said that you were dreaming it, or it was not true? And the children said, well, I would say I know what I saw. Anyway.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a great story. Yeah, and I'm actually glad to hear it made it into the children's book as well. So either of these books up here, I guess it's on this side here, The Believer, and then the children's book up above, both, that's what you're talking about there. So I want to ask, as award-winning journalists, how do you discern between fact and fiction around such a controversial topic?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, we were very basic in this book. We really didn't deal with any material that was questionable. We stuck to what was reported. We referenced UFOs because they were photographed and we had film, and we raised probably more questions than we presented in the way of facts. It was a great quote I read from the physicist Richard Feynman, who said, "I would rather have questions without answers than answers I can't question."
But I mean, you raised a very good question. What do you establish as facts? So we try to be very basic here and talk about things that have been photographed. They have been seen by many witnesses, and not talk about things that are really more speculative, that are more difficult to establish. like, who might be behind these UFOs or so. And we don't know. Obviously, we don't know. But the fact that these things have been seen and photographed by the Navy, that is a fact now. That is a fact. And the government has said it's a fact. And they've testified to Congress that it's a fact, that there are objects that we can't explain that are flying in the atmosphere and sometimes go underwater, which is really mysterious. And beyond that, we don't know. But that much we do know, that there are these things. So that's what we try to stick with.
And we did reference the way animals responded to UFOs, because people who have seen them see that their dogs and their cattle respond, in a certain way. So we put that in the book as well.
Absolutely. That's another bit of very puzzling evidence that animals seem to react to these objects in a way that that is very noteworthy.
It puts them on alert.
And they wouldn't act that way if there was nothing there. I
Right.
mean, they see something and they feel some energy or whatever, and react in a certain way. So that is a fact. But you raise up a good question. How do you establish what a fact is? It's very basic, and that's what we stick with in this book.
That's wonderful. As you were talking about animals, I'm just reminded of the very popular docuseries called Skinwalker Ranch. Are either of you fans of that series?
I am. I know behind it. I mean, that's a whole other
Discussion.
And it's too sophisticated for children. I must say that. It's very complicated. There was a ranch in Utah where a lot of strange things were witnessed, and what those things are, nobody knows. Again, but they are very, very strange and disturbing. And there's a whole book about what these things, trying to put down in on the pages what these things were, what kind of sightings were made, and efforts to understand them. But it's very mysterious. And again, I mean, if there's questions about UFOs, there's many, many more questions about the things that were seen at Skinwalker Ranch. And this is not something unique to our era or even, recent history. This goes way back around the world.
On Skinwalker Ranch, they have a lot of footage where they're showing cattle movements in conjunction with UFO sightings. And they have all this sophisticated equipment that's monitoring the skies. And so they can place those things. Those events correlate. So when something appears.
Yeah, we have a picture of cattle in our book. One of the illustrations that Adam did shows cattle because they did react.
We do have a page in the book that shows the cattle. And yes, animals have a very keen sense of hearing, and they do seem to have antennae that pick up the energy around them. So we did make that point in the book that they do react to these phenomena.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have another question. In your book, The Believer, about Harvard scientist John Mack, he was a psychiatrist, correct?
He was.
And he was quite credible, but when he started researching UFOs, or at least people's experiences that they were reporting about UFOs, he ran up against a lot of pushback from the administration. And I'm just curious to know if you ever experienced anything like that, as you, again, because you're a credible, well-respected, award-winning journalist, did you ever run up against anything like that?
Well, that's a very good question, again, Jessica. But the difference is when I and my colleagues came to editors at the New York Times with the story of this UFO unit that they had in the Pentagon that no one knew about, we based it strictly on credible sources, no anonymous sources. We quoted people who were running the unit, actually the head of the unit, who had quit because he was not getting enough support. And we have his letter of resignation. We had his performance reports. His name is Lou Elizondo. And everything we wrote in the New York Times was really based on a stated source, an identified source, documentation. John Mack, the Harvard psychiatrist, was very heroic in what he did, but he went off into areas that we didn't go into in the New York Times because reporting is a little different from what he was doing. He was researching a paranormal phenomenon that he couldn't understand, and that we don't understand to this day, but people were coming to him with stories, and again, to his credit, he could have walked away and said, this is crazy stuff. I'm not going to risk my reputation. But he said, this is so strange. People have reported these experiences, and I want to understand what they are. Well, that ran him into trouble with Harvard, because in many ways, Harvard was very conventional, and they didn't want the bad publicity and all kinds of things. So they did run an investigation of him, whether he was solidly based. And in the end, they exonerated him of any wrongdoing. And that's all in my book. So, but what John Mack did at Harvard, he went off into really very uncharted territory. And what we did in the New York Times with our series was really much more narrowly focused and based on identified sources of expertise. A lot of the people John Mack dealt with were ordinary people, citizens, who didn't have a scientific background, who had no scientific standing. They were just reporting what they were seeing, what they said happened to them. But in the New York Times, we quoted people with scientific or governmental expertise. So that's really the difference.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, when the U.S. government starts acknowledging it and releasing footage, it's hard to dispute that. So, have either of you ever seen an unidentified flying object in the sky?
We haven't, unfortunately. No.
Fortunately or unfortunately.
I'm curious to know, what is it about the topic that sparks so much interest for you?
Well, I started getting interested in it. I got Debbie interested in it after I wrote the Believer. But what happened is I was a correspondent for the New York Times in Texas, and I happened to pick up a copy of John Mack's second book called Passport to the Cosmos. He had written two pretty well-known books, although I didn't know about them. And I was struck by the fact that he was a well-known Harvard psychiatrist who was writing a book about these strange experiences that people had. And I thought I was very taken with the books and his writing, and I thought I would interview him. And a few days after that, after I discovered his book, he was run down and killed in London by a drunk driver. And so I couldn't interview him, alas, but I got very interested in the topic, and that set me off. And I spent, all in all, 17 years sort of putting together the story. I got access to his papers and all his research through his family. And Debbie, as she said, heard me working on this book for so long, and she thought it was interesting. And then, well, you tell the story.
Well, to me, it's just, one of these great unanswered questions. And, you think, are we alone or are we not alone? And where are these things coming from and what are they? So it's pretty fascinating. So I just love to provoke discussion among young people. And I'd love to hear the way children think about what these things might be. I think it would be fun and hopefully informative.
I mean, it was
Absolutely.
Debbie's idea that we take jump off from the Believer and do a book for children, because her background is writing books for children, picture books, very basic books that children can understand. So it hadn't occurred to me until that point that this material could really be used to explain this mystery or to lay it out, not explain it, but lay it out for children. So Debbie, with her background in writing about children's books and picture books, said, gee, this would be great collaboration.
The first idea is you want to entertain, and then hopefully inform. But you want children to have fun reading and to enjoy reading. And if you can get them to the point where they want to pick up the book or they ask you to read it a second time, you know, that's you're successful.
Absolutely. What was it like for you two working on that book together?
It was interesting process. You know, we just sort of shot the manuscript back and forth between computers. You know, I did one draft and then Ralph worked on another part of it. And then we talked about, you know, the language or a particular sentence. So we read each other's work. So this wasn't an entirely new process, but it was fun to work on a project together, and certainly easier to do a picture book is a biography, which is what The Believer is essentially. So
That might have been harder.
no, that I don't think I would have gone there. But you know, a picture book was the perfect project for us to join forces.
And also,
on.
I mean, if you respect, you know, your fellow writers' expertise, and Debbie's really very familiar with children's books, and she knew I'd been immersing myself in, you know, in the subject for the John Mack biography. So we each had a basic regard for the other's, you know, expertise and field of interest. So that helps. And if you're a couple to begin with, you accommodate yourself to each other, you know, you work well as a team. So in that sense, we were very privileged to work with each other on a project we both cared about, and we both respected each other's particular, you know, field of expertise.
Is there anything else either of you would like to share about either of these books that we didn't cover?
Well, I think it's a very important subject, first of all, and I think it's not gotten its due in children's books. As we said, Oz is the first, as far as we can tell, a picture book for children that is strictly factual. There've been a lot of fantasy books about, you know, aliens and you know, rocket ships and all that, but that's what we did not want to do. We wanted to do a basic guide to understanding at least the questions, not solving the mystery, because we're not ever going to be able to do that. And I think we are coming into a time now when this is going to be a bigger and bigger issue. Congress is interested in this. As I said, the government has been much more forthcoming now in acknowledging that these objects are real. We've made a lot of progress. We're not there yet by a long shot, because there's still a lot of secrecy. A lot of information is classified. And in the New York Times, we did not violate any classification. We couldn't get access to top secret stuff, but there is a lot of stuff there. So that, and people in Congress are interested. I think that in years to come, some of that information will come out. So this is a beginning, a start, but as Debbie said many times, that this is, we don't solve the mystery.
Right. And you know what? It's okay to talk about what you don't know. That's the point. And when if someone's reading this book in school, it's okay for the teacher not to have the answers for the children. Turn to the children, see what they come up with. So, you know, it is a mystery that I think adults and children share. No one's really the expert. There is just a very limited amount of information out there, but let's talk about it and let's see what we make of it. And that really is the point of the book.
And you know, and there's no point in shielding children from serious issues. I mean, we present it in a very low-key way, obviously, but children are going to be picking up this information in little bits and pieces anyway. So there's nothing wrong with acknowledging it and at least whetting their appetites, let's put it that way. Not, you know, solving it, no, but at least giving them some basis to ask questions and counter. A lot of the stuff that's out there is kind of silly. I mean, it is. So we wanted to give parents and children a basis to discuss this topic in a kind of a sober way.
Anything that encourages curiosity in children, I think, is a really good thing. So,
Absolutely.
Well, wonderful. I do have one more quick question about this change in behavior for the U.S. government on the topic. As you said, they're becoming a lot more forthright with the information that they have, or at least in acknowledging that there are things that we don't understand. what do you attribute that to? Do you think it's just that the information is so widely spread now, or do you think it has anything to do with them having a better handle on what they think it might be?
I think a little of both. I think the government knows a lot more than it's saying. I think that's fair. A lot of information is classified. But there's much more information out there. The cell phone era made everybody a reporter and a filmmaker, a photographer, a filmmaker. Everybody has been holding up their cell phones and taking pictures of objects, when in the old days, people had to run into the house and get the camera. So there are many more images, and I get them all the time. People send me, oh, look at what I found, and I look at it and I say, well, very hard to tell from your little movie that you took on your cell phone. It looks interesting, but you can't, obviously you can't make any judgments based on that. So I think the combination of the cat is out of the bag. I mean, there's too many people have seen too many things. The government has learned that it can't keep hiding this information. Members of Congress have gotten involved. So that's opened up the discussion more. So it's a combination of things. And, now that it's out there, it's very hard to put back.
Where can people buy your books?
Well, independent bookstores, obviously Amazon, Barnes & Noble, online, and the independent bookstores that have online presences, as most of them do now. So hopefully wherever they buy books, they can find it.
And I think the publisher has sold an audio book, or is in the process of creating an audio
There's a Kindle
book.
version.
There's a Kindle version, so you can get it,
The only thing I will add is that because the title is UFOHS, sometimes when you Google UFOs, it's UFOS, it will not come up. So it's UFOHS, or Google it under our names, Blumenthal, and then you'll find it.
Right, as it is up here in the
Yes.
cover.
Yes.
Yep. UFOs. And then there was also a tagline to that, UFOs, mysteries in the sky.
Yes.
So that should help people find it too.
Yes.
Right.
It should be easily available.
Yeah, and for anybody who's watching, if you want to get it from your library and your library doesn't have it, many libraries are happy to order books based on patron requests. So feel free to request it and get it into circulation at your local library.
We love libraries. We're great supporters of libraries, and it's great if a library, orders it and puts it up on display on the wall, and then children look at it and see it, and becomes a matter of discussion. So I grew up with a great library. Debbie did too.
And every week.
Oh, all the time, taking books out, taking them home. So and we love the things the library affords people to do, to sit there, read papers, take out books. It's a safe space, it's bathroom. I mean, it's just such a wonderful, and when they start cutting budgets and cutting libraries, it's really very dismaying. So we love the fact that the book will be available in libraries and people can get it from there and have discussion and whatever.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have it at our library. So I hope more libraries do the same.
Well, thank you, Jessica. We really enjoyed chatting with you, and this was a great chance to talk about the book and hopefully push children to read more and look at what's new in the world of science.
Thank you both for being here. I know what you say about being library supporters is true now, because you've done this for us twice, and we greatly appreciate it. Always wonderful speaking with you. All right, you two. Well, thank you so much, and best of luck on your book sales.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You're very welcome. Okay. Take care, both of you. I'll let you have your afternoon back. Thanks again.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
So long.